one, try to make it fun if you can. Like, I think we can all agree events like this are fun and it's helping you in your job search. So try to find something that is maybe networking related, where you'll meet people that you may not otherwise meet who could potentially help you in your search, but is also fun. Like, we have bagels, we have coffee, we're having interesting conversations. And then my other piece of advice, just to not get so overwhelmed, is to create short to-do lists that are achievable. So maybe have a goal for yourself where you do 3 to 5 job search things a week, and that could be coming to an event like this, getting coffee with someone, actually applying, working on your resume, building your LinkedIn profile, and just say, okay, it's Monday, I have to do X, and then by Friday I need to have all of these things accomplished, because then that way you don't feel so overwhelmed and it doesn't feel like it's taking over your life.
Yeah, I would say have focus. So using myself as an example of what not to do, I spent most of my, I was going to say early career, but like, I don't know if 8 years counts as early career, but I spent most of my career doing the same thing, and so I felt like I was in a really niche position, and I was trying to think about, like, what do I even do next if it's not the same job? And I spent probably 3 years in that, like, I don't know what I want to do, like, what should my next move be? And in fairness, I wasn't, dissatisfied with my job, so that was an okay thing for me. But I think it's important to try and have some focus, right? Because to Jeannie's point, it becomes overwhelming if you're trying to go to every networking event and you're trying to meet every person and explore 45 different career options. That's just too much work. So figure out how to narrow that focus down, because then you can actually make your outreach to people more targeted, have coffee chats with the right people who are going to help connect you with the right opportunities. And it's okay to do some of that exploratory work at the beginning, right? Like, talk to 5 different people, do your research, figure out, like, what are these jobs that I think I might be interested in, because there's often misnomers about what actually goes into a particular kind of role. Oftentimes people think of marketing as like a super soft job, but it's actually extremely data driven, and like people don't realize that off the bat often. So thinking about, like, actually talking to people about, like, what do you do in this role, narrow down what you actually think fits with your interests and your strengths, and then go really focused and targeted in terms of the next stages of the process.
Yeah, and I would sort of add to what both Mary and Nadia have said, that one thing that is really easy to do as part of the job process, at the Muse, one of the things that we recommend is, like, for every application you put in, you should tailor your resume and your cover letter to that position. However, it can get really easy to fall down this rabbit hole of, I have to make my resume perfect. I have to make my cover letter perfect. And you can spend, I was just talking about this with one of our career coaches recently, like, she had a client who had, 5 different jobs she wanted to apply to. She spent so much time trying to make her resume perfect that by the time she felt like that resume was ready, 3 of those jobs were no longer posted. So you have to sort of, like, at a certain point say, okay, like, I cannot spend like 37 hours refining my resume. Like, I can just, spend couple hours on it, make sure everything's spelled correctly, make sure it reflects my experiences, and then at some point you just have to let it go. And sorry, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say on that note, one thing that's really helpful so you can quickly tailor a resume is have a running document with pre-made bullet points that outline all of your experience. So literally you're just like picking and choosing and copying and pasting, and maybe you're adding in like the word strategic or something to like catch those keywords, because then you can apply a lot faster that way and have tailored resumes.
Yeah, I give that piece of advice to people all the time, because you probably accomplished something really impressive a year ago, and when you go to reflect on your experiences now, it's not going to come to mind, and you're going to completely forget to include that in your presentation of yourself. So keeping a running list of all your accomplishments, your sort of like draft resume should probably be 7 pages long. Your real resume should be like a page long. No more than 2 if you're really experienced. But I would also say have someone else look at your resume. Keeping in mind someone whose judgment you trust and you think has some knowledge of the industry that you're trying to enter, because resumes look very different depending on what kind of role you're trying to apply for. So just getting that second look can be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, so Mary mentioned keywords. And I think, one of the things that can be challenging for anybody who's looking to make a career pivot is that, you don't know exactly how to frame your resume and your cover letter to sell yourself as the right person for this role. And I think looking for keywords in the job description and making sure that those are reflected in your resume and in your cover letter are, that's really important because, first of all, applicant tracking systems, the sort of software that a lot of HR departments use, will often screen for those particular keywords. And also you just want to be able to prove it's not the job of the recruiter or the hiring manager to make that leap and say, oh yeah, maybe this person would be good at this job. It's your job to sort of sell yourself as that. Another great piece of advice that I once got when I was looking to make a career pivot is to look at the LinkedIn profiles of people who have the job that you want, and look at the kinds of phrases that they use and the way they describe their roles and the things that they do, and see if you can take some of that language and apply it to yourself. What's some other advice that you would give in terms of cover letters and resumes specifically for people who are looking to make a pivot?
Yeah, I think Nadia's advice is dead on. Find someone who is in that role in your research phase and have them review and give you tips because they will probably see things that you may not. I also think if you're able to work with a coach, that can really help. I know when I went through a similar process, it was really helpful. I didn't realize my resume was in total jargon for the current industry I was in, right? Because you're such in that bubble. But when I met with this coach, she was like, tell me in English what this means. And so we'd had a conversation, and she was able to help me take the skills that I had developed in one industry and just rephrase them to be more appropriate to the industry I wanted to be in. So I think having that third-party perspective, either from a coach, someone already in the role or industry you want to get in, can really be helpful.
Yeah, I would say, to your earlier point, looking at what the core skill sets are, and oftentimes when you're making a pivot, you might not have the experience, but you probably have some transferable skill sets. And so it's thinking about how do you position projects that you've worked on to highlight the fact that you were able to flex those muscles and those skills that they're looking for in this next role. On the LinkedIn piece specifically, not just in an ATS system that's auto-screening, but as a recruiter, when I'm searching for somebody on LinkedIn or on a platform, I'm often doing skill set searches or keyword searches, and skill sets that are things that people take for granted, that you take for granted as skills that you have. If you don't articulate those, people aren't going to assume your abilities, right? So as an example, I worked with someone in a technical space, and nowhere on his profile was he listing the fact that he was proficient in Python and all these other languages. And I'm like, recruiters are just looking for people who have those words on their resume, right? They're not going to assume because of your job title that you know how to do that. So you need to be really thoughtful about articulating what skills you have. And then also on the cover letter piece, I kind of hate cover letters. I'm not a great cover letter writer.
Does anybody actually like cover letters? I mean, no, right?
No. But one thing I would emphasize is that there is a distinction between the content that is meant to go in your cover letter and on your resume, right? So your resume should be able to tell me what you've done, what skills you've possessed, and what your accomplishments or outcomes are, right? So even when you think about the individual bullets on your resume, it should always be what you did, how you did it, and what the outcome was, being as quantitative as possible, right? So I should be able to look at your resume and gather what you can do and what you're capable of. The cover letter's purpose is to fill the gap, right? Talk to me about why you're passionate about our organization's mission. Talk to me about why you think your skills are transferable, or why you have a really particular interest in this role or this company. It's not meant to be redundant to the information that's on your resume.
Well, let's talk about LinkedIn a little bit more, actually, because I think, all three of our websites have, hiring partners, job listings. Of course, we all know that, in addition to, the sites represented here. You can apply for jobs on LinkedIn, you can apply on Indeed, you can apply through Glassdoor. There are all sorts of places to apply for jobs, but LinkedIn is unique in that it's a place where your professional profile is out there and recruiters are actually looking for you there. So I think it's interesting to think about like how your LinkedIn can be a really powerful tool to enable jobs to come to you. And it's something that I think a lot of people, you know, still neglect a little bit, or they think, oh, this is just a copy and paste of my resume. Where in fact, like there's an opportunity with LinkedIn, for example, in your summary to tell a little bit of to tell a story about yourself, especially like if you're trying to make a career pivot or something like that, to tell your story a little bit differently. How do you approach LinkedIn when you're talking to people?
Sure. I think one thing that I didn't know until like a couple of years ago, so I'm just gonna pass this knowledge forward. If you are actively looking for a job and you want to utilize LinkedIn, make sure you have the notification under jobs that signals to recruiters you're looking, because then they'll know that you're open to new opportunities, etc. And I also think like the summary is a great place on your LinkedIn profile to showcase who you are, right, as an employee and a worker, and what you're interested in. So I would encourage you to think about what your value proposition is as an employee, and that can be particularly important as you're making a career pivot, to really show, like, I know, say you work in marketing and you want to go into product development, so you can really take those skills you've learned as a marketer and explain in that summary as part of your value prop how those skills translate to product development. And I think your summary is a great place to do that. It's also a great place to highlight key accomplishments at your company, and really help tell your own brand story as who you are and what you want to do in your career.
Yeah, I would agree, particularly if you're open and actively looking for opportunities. Having that profile completed as robustly as possible is going to be in your best interest, because as recruiters, the first thing we're doing is filtering for things, right? Where are you trying to work? What kind of industries? Are you open to opportunities? If I do a search and I come back with 1,000 people, the first folks I'm going to look at are the people who are actively looking, because I know they're going to be more responsive to me, right? But also adding some of those other factors, your skill sets, your locations that you're open to, if you're interested in relocating, right? Because that'll include you in search results that you might not otherwise have shown up in. And then I think just keeping in mind the content piece, right? Because when we're searching for keywords and we're looking at the content of your resume, having your titles and only your titles is going to minimize the number of searches that you are surfacing in. So you want to have maybe not exactly the same content as your resume, but key highlights, particularly thinking about those skill sets and accomplishments that will allow you to directly translate what you're doing to a search for the job that you want to have.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about how to position yourself for the job that you want to have. But I'm sure there are people in this room, and there are just a lot of people out there who know they want to make a career pivot, but they're not exactly sure where they want to go.
3 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I went through a similar experience myself, where I started my career in magazine journalism, and for anybody who's been paying attention, magazines, not so much right now. It's an industry that's not doing very well, and I know a lot of my former colleagues who are in a similar position where they know that they don't have a long sustained career path in print magazine journalism, but they're really just not sure how to apply the content creation skills that they have to other types of fields, whether it's marketing or digital content, whatever, and they just don't even know where to start in terms of like where should they go. I mean, I think this is an area where informational interviews can be really helpful, but Nadia, you mentioned that you were sort of wandering in the wilderness for a while. Like, how did you finally narrow down where you wanted to be?
Well, I needed a friend to bully me into action a little bit. She was like, we've been talking about this for a while, just like, get off the couch.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for me was that I thought about what skills I had acquired in my current job, but also what my passions were, right? So what do I actually enjoy about my current job, but also what do I enjoy doing outside of work? So in my particular case, I was doing recruiting, but focused more on early career, and a lot of what I focused on with intention at work and outside of work was equity and wanting to work in the equity space. And so once I sort of ruminated on the fact that I was intentionally spending a lot of time on that particular issue, that helped me to then think about how do I direct my career search so that my new job will encompass more of that in my actual scope of work. But yeah, it's hard to think about what you want to do, but I would also say there's a level of like self-awareness and confidence that's required, right? When you're thinking about what you want to do and the job search. I think there's like a, not saying quite, but there's this sort of like research observation, right? That you'll have a man who looks at a job description and he'll say, there's 5 qualifications and I have 2 of them, so like I'm the perfect guy for the job. And then there's a woman who's like, I only have 4.5 of these, so I'm not going to apply because I'm not who they're looking for, right? And so there's a little bit of confidence required to say like, this is what I want to do, and I might not have done it, and I might not be the exact match right now, but I know I can do this. And then you go out and do your research and develop the confidence, and then when you talk to people, articulate that message, right? Articulate that confidence, and use that network to kind of drag you into the spaces you want to be.
Yeah, and for me, another possible approach, this doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but I really thought about the type of company that I wanted to work at. Yeah. So I knew that, again, shameless plug for the Muse, where we have company profiles, but I knew that I wanted to be involved with content creation in some way, and I had a great informational interview with somebody who said, you should really think about working at some place where content's part of the product as opposed to being a content marketer where you're selling another product, which is a great piece of advice for me personally. But then what I really did is I thought about what kind of company did I want to work for, and I sort of, by talking to a lot of people, narrowed it down that like, I really love the energy of a startup, and I would love to work at a company that's led by women, and I would love to work at a company that has X, Y, and Z values, and where I would have the opportunity to do this kind of work. And by narrowing it down in that way, that was a way for me to be able to filter out all the different types of editor jobs that came across my plate, but also a way for me to say, okay, like I'm identifying 5 or 6 female-led startups that are doing interesting things with content, and then just sort of stalk those companies and see like where, do they have positions that could be a great fit for me.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Jeannie, and I think Nadia too. The central theme of making a big career pivot is it requires a lot of introspection and a lot of research, particularly if you are very unsure of what you want to do, which I was in that position a couple years ago. And so it just took a lot of time, like what I like to call like being selfish and like thinking about what was going to be best for me. What kind of company did I want to go to? What did I like about my current role? What did I not like? What did I want in a future role? And then once you kind of have that boiled down, just start doing informational interviews and talking to people who have roles that you think will be interesting. And it's really helpful because I talked to someone whose job sounded fabulous on his LinkedIn profile, and then I actually talked to him and I was like, no, I don't know. So it can be really helpful in both like positive and negative ways, because it'll help you find out like, oh, this seems so cool, and then you're like, oh, maybe not.
Yeah, and I think also to just remember, like you have to be kind of like ruthless with yourself a little bit. There's a lot of introspection, but like be gentle with yourself too. Like it's really hard to do all this work, and especially if you're in a position right now where you don't love your current job, or you have a terrible boss, or you're really burned out, and you need to make a change, but like it feels really hard because where you are right now is so terrible. Like that's normal. Like it's okay, but you just have to sort of take a step back, be gentle with yourself, but also like push yourself a little bit to do that work, because it's going to be hard, but in a year or in 2 years you're going to be so glad that you did it.
Yeah. Just also, in terms of the way your own brain works, because we talked a lot about being intentional, and sometimes I'm not the most intentional person, so I actually really like a process of elimination kind of process, right? So like making a big list of like all the things you think are options, and then crossing off the ones that you're like, maybe not. It's like embracing that like a Marie Kondo kind of mentality. Are you guys watching Tidying Up? Maybe, right? She has this idea of what sparks joy for you, right? So like when I look at this big list, like what are the 50% of things that I'm like, meh, not really. Because I went through the process, right, where a lot of people were reaching out to me for new opportunities, but I had to also feel comfortable saying like, I want a new opportunity, but like, I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna be happy in that opportunity. And being thoughtful, because you could be in a situation where you're really unhappy, and I always tell people like, do not run away from a job, right? Take a job you're excited about, because you're gonna run away from your job into something else that you're gonna be potentially equally as unhappy with, and now you feel like you're stuck there for another year and a half, and that's not where you want to be. You should just stick it out for another 6 months and find something that you really like. But I think that process of elimination can be like a helpful method as well.
So we've mentioned in passing a couple times informational interviews and talking to people, which also connects us to the dreaded networking word. So, when you started like talking to people and in different kinds of roles and eliminating them, how did you even start to reach out to these people?
Yeah, so I did a few things. One thing I think it's really important is, and there's study after study that shows women aren't as great at doing this as men are, is find mentors. Find mentors that you can talk to and help make those introductions. That is how I essentially pivoted from, I was living in Texas, I wanted to move here, I didn't know anyone, and a mentor in Texas introduced me to someone she knew here, and it helped expand this whole network to me, which is also how I ended up talking to a gentleman who had a job, and I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So I think, engaging your mentors, finding mentors is really key. I also think looking at networks that you may not necessarily think of your first go-to as to finding new connections. So I know you're all probably involved in different organizations, whether you're a working parent, if you have like a happy hour group or whatever it is. Those folks should be resources that you go to, and let them know that you're thinking about this change. Do they know anyone? And then I'm also a big supporter of really relying on your alumni networks from college or grad school, or even high school, whatever it is. And LinkedIn also makes it really easy, depending on the school, to export a list of all the alumni if they have an alumni group, and you can, if you like Excel like me, you can filter all of those things. You can see where people work, and then you can like stalk them on the internet and see if they might be a good person for you to reach out to. And I think having some type of commonality helps in making that initial outreach. But I also want to say, like, don't be afraid to do cold outreach. Like, sometimes there's going to be a company or a person that you really want to talk to, and you cannot find an in. And I don't be scared to reach out. Like, the worst they're going to say is no. So send a thoughtful message and ask if they're willing to chat with you. And then, particularly in networking, when reaching out to people, I think you should be as specific as possible of what you want and how much time you want. So say, can you talk on these days for 15 minutes? Here are times, and then send the calendar invitation to them. Because people are busy, and so if you can make it really easy on someone, it makes it more likely that they will not say no.
Ironically, my job is pretty much to network with people, but I only like doing it for work and not for myself. I think one thing that you said that resonated with me, the reason I became a recruiter is because I love connecting people, right? I like finding out what you're interested in and knowing that you do that and making you talk to each other and figuring out how that can be beneficial to folks. And so as you're thinking about what you want to do and as you're kind of narrowing down your options, like, be intentional about talking about that with people, and sharing that information, because you don't know who everyone else knows. And most people, you know, for better or for worse, get their next opportunity through a connection or through a referral. And so being thoughtful about talking to people about your interests so that they can help to create connection with you is really beneficial. You shouldn't be afraid of cold outreach, but warm outreach is always a little easier. And so asking folks in your network to connect you, or just telling them what you want and having them organically connect you with folks, can be really helpful. I think also, like, networking feels like the art of the extrovert, right? Not everybody's comfortable walking into a room and introducing themselves to 20 different people and making small talk, which I love so much. So I think just being thoughtful, like, especially if you are more introverted, in doing those coffee chats, maybe setting up more of those one-on-one opportunities, and also, you know, trying to reach out to folks where you actually have a genuine interest in learning something about them or from them, so that that interaction feels a little more natural, and doesn't feel quite as awkward as it might be at first.
Yeah, and I would add to that that, you know, don't be afraid to just ask people straight out. Like, if you've met somebody for coffee and you're having a great conversation with them, don't be afraid to just say at the end, like, is there anybody else that you think I should talk to? I mean, some people will just naturally do that. You know, you're having this conversation and they'll say, oh, you're interested in that. Oh, you should talk to this person, whatever. Some people you have to kind of like say, you know, could you introduce me to somebody like this? Is there anybody else that you think I could learn from on this area? And then they'll bring that up. The other thing that I would add too is that, you know, again, like, if you're an introvert, or, you know, just human, like, networking can feel gross and transactional sometimes. You know, you're like, oh, like, I have to go to a networking event and put on a name tag and, like, collect 7 business cards, and then, or, you know, and then go, like, make my follow-up emails and things like that. And I think if you can think of it as more relationship building, so, you know, networking is not just about coming to events like this or going to, like, a happy hour for your industry. Like, networking is also, like, keeping in touch with the people that you worked with 6 jobs ago, or, like, you know, shooting an email to your boss from that internship you had in college and just updating them on what you're doing. And genuinely, like, oh, like, you see an article that reminds you of somebody that you spoke to a year ago, like, and, you know, DMing them and saying, hey, I saw this article, thought of you, like, what are you up to these days? Let's get together. Like, it can be, like, organic relationship building like that. It's not just all about, like, adding LinkedIn connections and, you know, trying to accumulate as many emails as possible.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable advice. And on that note, if people are making connections for you, make sure you're keeping that person updated on if you met with the person. Thank them for making the introduction. What is the result of that? How is your job search going? Because I think, too, something that can often get lost if you're just really after trying to find a new job is keeping those connections updated, because people put their reputation on the line when they make an introduction for you. So I think it's just important to let them know how it's going. And you can always, like, setting up a meeting, my favorite thing to do is just say, thanks, Kim, for that introduction, moving you to BCC. So then Kim knows that I connected with the introduction she made. I think that's really, really key.
Yeah. So one thing that we wanted to make sure to cover is the challenges of balancing job hunting with parenthood, or possible parenthood, or about to become parenthood. And, you know, this is something that, you know, perhaps many of the people in this room will face or have faced. You know, job hunting when you have children, or perhaps you're pregnant, or you're thinking about becoming pregnant, can start to feel a little bit fraught. How do you approach, so what's the advice that FairyGodBoss gives in terms of approaching, for example, like, you're 30 and you're actually trying to start a family, but you're also looking for a new job. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think just at a very high level, all of these are such personal conversations to have, and depending on where you are in your job search or an interview process, at the end of the day, it really goes back to your own comfort level and what you feel comfortable revealing and sharing. All of that being said, I do think there are resources out there like FairyGodBoss that kind of allow you to get some intel about a company if they're going to be supportive of you, whether you're currently a parent or thinking of being a parent. So I think I mentioned earlier that we have our maternity leave resource center. It's a crowdsourced database of leave benefits at various companies that you can check out. You can also read reviews on our site, that are for women by women to let you know, like, is this a place where, if I have to leave at 3 p.m. because my kid got sick, like, is my employer going to be okay with that? So I do think there are some things on the front end you can do to find out benefits, culture, all of that stuff to see if this is really going to be an environment where you can thrive.
By the way, look at infertility benefits too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of our company pages capture a lot of that information, so if that's something important to you, I encourage you to look up a company that you're interested in on our site and see what other people are saying about it. I had another point on that. It escapes me. But yeah, I think there's a lot. Going back to the informational interview. I also think, like, once you've done a research and a company seems great, that's another time to reach out to someone who's working at that company, hopefully via a warm introduction, to really get, like, okay, you've read everything that you can online, this company seems great, but you want to actually hear from someone who's there who can give you that insight. And then I also think going through the interview process, depending on where you are, like, don't be afraid to ask about corporate culture. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like some people can be really intimidated, but, like, you can ask that without being like, can I leave at 3 p.m.? Like, you can ask, like, what is the corporate culture like? Why do you like working here? Like, things like that. Is there, like, what level of flexibility do you have in your current role? So there are tactful ways that you can kind of get at that information during the interview process as well.
Yeah, and I think that open-ended questions are great too, because obviously if you're talking to somebody, say, like, do you like working here? Is this a diverse company? Like, no one's going to say no to any of those questions. Like, but if you sort of ask a little more open-endedly, like, what are your favorite things about working here? How have you seen diversity reflected in this company? Things like that will get you much more useful results. And I think, again, like, all three of our companies have a lot of information. All three of our sites have a lot of information about companies. The Muse has, like, information straight from employees themselves. So I think, as many data points as you can gather from actual people who work there is really helpful.
Transparently, do not have children. So I have not personally balanced this, but the only thing I would add, because definitely agree with your points around corporate culture, is just being thoughtful based on who you're talking to and your experience during perhaps an interview process, thinking about who is the right person to ask and when in the process do you want to ask, right? So do you want to ask your interviewer, or should you be talking to the recruiter? Do you want to ask before you've had your first phone screen, or maybe once you get a final round interview, then you start probing a bit more because you know that they like you, and you're more likely to get an honest answer or a friendlier answer. So I would say, use your judgment to gauge, how those conversations are going and who you feel comfortable talking to, but it's something to consider.
Great. So some final takeaways. This is a question directly from LMHQ, so I'm just going to read it out. What do you recommend so what are the 3 steps that someone should take, or even like one step, like when you leave this room, what's the takeaway that you should come away from this conversation with, and like what should you like go back to your computer or your phone or your office and think about for the next step in your job search? With the caveat that we don't know where all of you are in your job search, so it's sort of a tough question, but
yeah. So with the caveat that we don't know where you are, and I'm going to assume you've done the introspection phase and you know where you want to go, right? So my first step would be to start the research phase. make a list of companies that you're interested in, start reading about them, make an Excel spreadsheet, and then figure out who you know at those companies, or who is like a second degree connection that can connect you to someone in those companies. And then try to connect with someone who is in a role that you think you might be interested in.
Yeah, similarly to that, I would say not to go out and like type a job title into a search engine and pull up the 100 jobs there and start applying to every single one of those things. I mean, again, like as we've been talking about this entire time, like really being thoughtful about like what is and isn't going to be the right thing for you. You know, it's better to apply for 3 jobs that look like a really great fit for you, that you've put a lot of thought into, that you've tailored your resume and your cover letter for, than to just blanket the city with like 100 resumes for things that you just haven't, like you're not quite sure are the right fit.
Agree with both of those. Take away a good connection from folks in this room, right? Because someone might be looking for a job and you might be looking for their job, and wouldn't that be nice? So I would sort of start here, right? Like practice that discussion about what you want to be doing. Try and make connections with your peers and folks who are going through the same experience, and see how you can walk away with maybe 1 or 2 of those helpful, warm connections.
Yeah. So I think we have time for some questions.